every now and then something happens in the NBA that causes the league to literally change the rules. Think about when they wanted to deter tanking and they changed the draft lottery odds in an effort to do that. Think about when Kevin Durant joined the 73-9 Warriors because of a cap spike in 2016. The league hasn't changed rules on that yet, but they're going to. They're never going to let that happen again. And there's something happening right now in the league that is probably going to be one of these events that cause the league to add or change the rules. And this, of course, as many things do this season, revolves around Victor Wembanyama, the French phenom. If you haven't heard of him, he's pretty good. And he's one of, if not the best, draft prospects of the last 20, 25 years in the league. And it's not just this scenario of like, okay, where could Victor Wembanyama go and tanking and all that. We've talked about that in the past, about teams, intentionally losing and all that. But it's a specific scenario and it's a sequence of events that led to this scenario. The New Orleans Pelicans are a very good basketball team right now, and they have a real legitimate chance of getting Victor Wembanyama getting the first pick in this draft because of a previous trade they made with the LA Lakers where they sent Anthony Davis away, and they have the rights to the Lakers pick this year as a pick swap. And we all know the Lakers are not very good. They are legitimately one of the worst teams in the league record-wise, and from a talent standpoint, they just don't have a lot of depth. There's not a lot happening on this roster apart from some kind of trade that makes you think that they're going to be a non-lottery team this year. And if they're a top 10 or a top 5 pick kind of team and New Orleans gets that pick, it's going to be a crazy situation. It's something that like teams are already concerned about, like they're afraid of. There's reports of like, what are we going to do if New Orleans gets this guy? Because it's already a young and up and coming team with Zion, who was a great first overall pick himself. Brandon Ingram, who's turned into a really good scorer and two-way player. CJ McCollum, they have a ton of depth. They have so many guys like Dyson Daniels that isn't really even playing for them because of how much depth they have on this roster despite being the 8th pick in the draft and a really good player. And adding Victor Wembanyama to this nucleus in New Orleans, it wouldn't be as bad necessarily as Kevin Durant joining the 73-9 Warriors because those were all proven players. Like you're adding, KD to Steph, Clay, and Draymond. But from a young talent perspective, it will be the most assets that a young team has ever had. Like if you were to try and just trade away, if they were to get Victor Wembanyama, if you were to just say, okay, what could we get in a trade for Wembanyama, Zion, Brandon Ingram, and CJ McCollum? Like it would be an unbelievable amount of stuff. They have so many assets. They still have future picks. And what this leads to, in my opinion, if it does happen, if they end up with Wembanyama, or even if they end up with, a top 4 pick in this class and get a really good player to add to this roster, they're going to look at some serious changes moving forward in terms of how draft picks can be traded, because it has been a theme of the last 5 to 7 years that teams have been more and more willing to give up all these future draft picks in exchange for star players. Think about, for example, Brooklyn trading away all their future picks in exchange for James Harden. Now they have Simmons. They're falling apart. The Lakers, as we've covered, trading all that stuff for Anthony Davis, they're now falling apart. We have teams like Oklahoma City that have all these future draft picks. We have a variety of different teams around the league that are willing year after year to give up multiple future firsts. A team like Minnesota that, despite having a young core, has not played well with the addition of Rudy Gobert. They owe future picks. And there's two sides to this. One is what we've covered in the beginning, which is like what happens if you're New Orleans and you get Brandon Ingram in the deal, and then you get lottery luck with Zion, and then you get this pick from the Lakers that might be a top 5 pick, and you build this young super team, this incredible team that never would have been able to be created without the Anthony Davis trade and the incredible amount of assets they got in that deal. And then the other side of that is this disparity that creates not just between New Orleans and the rest of the league, but also the Lakers and the rest of the league, because when you get the first pick, when you're bad enough to have the first pick, there's a reason that you have that pick. It's either because you had a ton of injuries or you're just not very good and you need that player, you need that first overall pick to add to the talent pool of your roster, and to just not have that if you're the Lakers is a huge issue. And that disparity is something that I think that we're going to have the league, or see the league take a look at over the next couple of seasons, potentially in the new CBA, and make adjustments in terms of how teams are able to make trades like this. There's a precedent for this as well. In the past, teams were trading away all the future first round picks way on into the future, and we have the Stepien rule for a reason. Teams cannot trade away straight up first round draft picks in consecutive seasons. You can do pick swaps, which is what the Lakers did for this season. That's why it's a pick swap between them in New Orleans, but you cannot just straight up trade future first round picks because it got teams in trouble, specifically Cleveland. That's why the Stepien rule exists, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the league step in at some point in the CBA over the next couple of seasons to prevent situations like this, because initially it was very exciting when it's like, look at all these future picks, look at all these assets that teams like New Orleans and Oklahoma City have, but now it's like, wait, Shea might be one of the best guards in the entire league, and they've got all these future picks, and New Orleans has a ton of really great core pieces, and they might add a generational prospect in Victor Wembanyama. And yes, that's exciting, but from a competitive standpoint, that's a significant issue if you're the league, that teams are able to build groups like this. It's why they don't want tanking to happen. Not only is it bad for the on-the-court product as these teams are tanking, but it also creates a disparity in terms of how teams are able to build their teams. It's the reason why teams continue to tank because it's a great way to build a team. It provides a lot of different advantages, and making moves like this is just another way that teams are continuing to try and take advantage of the rules, and as a result, the league might change them. And Oklahoma City and New Orleans are the two teams I'm focusing on here because they got foundational pieces in the initial trades, in this case being Oklahoma City and Russell Westbrook, and Paul George and Russell Westbrook in Oklahoma City, getting Shea back, and then all these future picks and some other moves that they made as well to get picks, and then getting Brandon Ingram back if you're New Orleans. The Zion thing was luck, and then you have all these future picks as well, with potentially ending up with Victor Wembanyama. But there are other examples of this around the league as well, like I mentioned earlier, Houston, Utah. Like, we haven't seen what those picks will become for those teams ultimately, but there's a real possibility that they do become something really, really significant. And I honestly don't know what the league will look like in 10 years with all these different teams owing these future picks. And it's a situation where, like I said, these teams really just kind of did what was best for them in the moment. I mean, the Lakers won the title. The Pelicans weren't going anywhere with Anthony Davis. He didn't want to be there anyway. But it's also a really interesting situation because if you think about a handful of teams here, so like Philadelphia, let's just say, for example, things don't go well this year. They lose in the second round again. They've got all this stuff invested in these players. Things don't go particularly well. Other example is teams like Phoenix, teams like, maybe you could even make the case for Golden State, teams that are seemingly contenders, but maybe if things don't go that well for them over, the following few seasons, what would their rosters look like if they decided to do the Anthony Davis thing or the Paul George or Russell Westbrook thing, where you're a 45 to 50 win team, but you're not quite a contender. You're not really a team that is actually going to push for a title. Does it make sense to just push the reset button and get an Oklahoma City or New Orleans package and situation in exchange for those stars? Because we've never really seen it go poorly. We've never really seen any of those four situations. Utah didn't have to rebuild. Utah didn't have to trade away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. They could have run it back. They could have won 50 games this year, and they decided, you know what? Let's get all these future things. Let's get all these usable players this year. Let's try and be bad at some point, get all these future picks. The Oklahoma City thing, they didn't have to trade Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Paul George wanted out because he had the opportunity to go to LA and play with Kawhi, but if that never happened, they would have continued to run it back with those guys as well. New Orleans did kind of have to trade Anthony Davis because his contract was going to run out relatively soon, but they didn't necessarily have to in that moment. And every single one of those teams, I think you could throw Houston in here as well with James Harden requesting a trade. Every one of those teams is in a better situation now than they would have been if they had just continued to run it back with those guys. It's almost never failed. I can't think of an example right now in the last 5 to 7 years of teams that are semi-contenders but not really at the top of that list, trading away their stars, trading away Donovan Mitchell, trading away Rudy Gobert for a ton of assets at the peak of their value, and then moving forward with a young team with these future picks. That might be the new tanking. Like, that might be the tanking of the next 10 years, where teams push and push and push, and right when they feel like, you know what, it's just not going to happen for us, let's trade these guys away to a team that actually sees themselves as a contender. We can get all these young picks and stuff, and it might be, like I said, the next tanking, the most viable team building strategy out there. And I would not be surprised if the way that teams can trade picks right now in the NBA is entirely different 5 to 7 years from now. Because when things like this happen, when the league goes out of their way to change the rules, it's because of an individual event. And a lot of times it's because of an incredible player. Like Kevin Durant joining the Warriors in 2016 was not intended. That was not something the league wanted to happen. They couldn't figure out a way to smooth out the salary cap. An incredible player joined an incredible team, and that'll never happen again. If there's an opportunity in the future for there to be a cap spike, the league will manipulate it so it doesn't happen. We've already seen it in the past when the league shut down and was suspended. They manipulated the salary cap so that it would stay level rather than dropping an incredible amount as a result of a decrease in league revenue. They're going to change the rules on that in the future. They're never going to allow that again. Same thing with the tanking stuff I mentioned in the beginning of the video. And if Victor Wembanyama joins the Pelicans or Oklahoma City or a variety of different teams that are already in a great spot, it defeats the entire purpose of what the draft is for. Now, yes, the Lakers didn't have to trade all that stuff for Anthony Davis. They didn't have to include pick swaps in every other year. You don't know what those negotiations look like, but that's not the point of the draft. Like, the point of the draft is for bad teams to get good players, and constantly and consistently we've seen throughout the history of the league, teams try and find ways around that. They try and find ways around being actually bad from a talent perspective, but also still getting the first or a top 5 pick in the draft. That's the point of tanking, is to be bad, rest your guys, whatever, and then all of a sudden you're good all at once. The same concept applies here with getting all these future picks from teams that you think will fall apart eventually, and if the teams aren't going to stop themselves, if they're not going to stop trading away 25 and 27 and 29 future first round picks and pick swaps in between every other year for a chance at a star because they want to win a title, and if it's going to keep being this, we're not trying to win it all and we're trying to do everything we can to win, if that's going to continue to be that much of a disparity, the league's going to do something about it. Like, they're not just going to continue to allow teams to have all these future draft picks and put themselves in an incredible position, even though it's exciting, especially for these smaller market teams. It's too much of a disparity at the top and at the bottom of the league, in terms of the goals of each of these teams, and it's going to continue to happen. They're not going to stop themselves from doing it. Even if the Lakers give up Victor Wembanyama to the New Orleans Pelicans, if another star becomes available, there's going to be a team that's going to be willing to give up 5 future first-round picks in exchange for that guy. If you're in New York, for example, and you've got these future first-round picks and you want to make a move and you want to put yourself into contention status, they're going to do it. It's why they put in the step-in rule in the first place, and I don't know what they would call this upcoming rule, but I would not be surprised at all if this season and the environment and the context around Victor Wembanyama and the other prospects in this draft, quite frankly, forces the league to make some really drastic changes to the rules with the new CBA coming up. They're already looking at rules changes in terms of, draft eligible players and the incredible increase in salaries and trying to smooth out the cap. This could be another thing you could add to the list, certainly, because this is going to be an incredible moment if they do end up with him. I can't even comprehend what a Pelicans team would look like with like CJ McCollum, Herb Jones out there to guard, Brandon Ingram, Zion, and Victor Wembanyama. That would be arguably the most talented young team. I don't think it would be an argument. It would be the most talented young team in league history if they got Victor Wembanyama. And if it happened once, I wouldn't be surprised that the league never allows it to happen again.